We hear about serial killers and violent criminals from some of our favorite TV shows, but we don't often get to experience the visceral reality of what it's like to sit across the table from a serial killer and talk to them. I asked Jim Clemente and Mary Ellen O'Toole, two former FBI profilers. I wanted to know more about what it takes to get into the minds of some of these killers and what their experience was during decades in the field.
My name is Jim Clemente. I'm a retired supervisory special agent from the FBI and profiler. And now I'm a writer-producer, and I've done things like written and produced the show Criminal Minds for many years.
My name is Mary Ellen O'Toole, and currently I'm the director of the Forensic Science Program at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and I'm a retired FBI agent / FBI profiler.
But behavioral analysis actually encompasses a lot more than just profiling. We do a number of things like getting involved in investigations immediately. We do investigative strategies, interview strategies. We do prosecution strategies. We help with interacting with the media to help get the public behind what we need for an investigation. So those are all things that we do on top of profiling, which is basically reverse engineering a crime based on behavior exhibited at the crime scene or pre and post offense behavior.
So all of our kind of background research comes together at a point where we then create what's called a criminal investigative analysis of how the crime occurred, what the victimology was, what the motivation was.
The motives for killing widely vary, but there are things that people who kill are hiding from everyone except their victims at the last moment.
But the one question that I find always the most valuable is, why did you do it that way? Why did you pick that victim? Why did you choose, why did you commit the assault post-mortem? Why not do it before the person was dead? So once they tell you a fact or a factoid, then I always want to know, okay, but why did you do it that way? And that's what the question that I rely on the heaviest is. I want them to explain their answer to me. I want them to go much deeper. Don't just tell me you killed her, or tell me how. Tell me why.
David Parker Ray may be the most prolific serial killer ever, killing for 50 years with an estimated 60 victims. He kept a trailer he called the Toy Box.
And I walked into the Toy Box, and I knew immediately what it was. And I knew immediately what it meant, because I had seen it before in other cases. They were methods of torture. They were instruments that David used for torturing and ultimately killing his victims. And then shortly after I went through the Toy Box and pointed out what that was, then they said David wanted to meet the profiler that came out on his case. And so I went to meet him in a very small New Mexico jail with hardly any correctional officers there. So it was just me and David. And I remember watching him walk down the hallway to meet me. And he was tall and slender, and he walked very slow, and he came up and he had shackles on, and he was wearing the orange jumpsuit. And he came up to me, and he had just a very sweet smile on his face, kind of a little bit of a Southern drawl to how he spoke. And he grabbed my hand with both of his hands and gave me a very warm handshake. And he said, "Oh, Mary Ellen, it's so nice to meet you. It's a pleasure. Please have a seat. Can I get you anything to drink? Maybe like a cup of coffee or a soft drink?" And I'm thinking, this isn't your living room, David. This is the county jail. But I kept having to tell myself, don't forget, Mary Ellen, what you already know. This is one of the most charming men I had ever met as an FBI agent on a case. And yet I had to remember it's the same man that is a torturer, and he tortured and killed women in the Toy Box that I had just been in hours before. And I will always remember that about David. What you saw was not what you got with so many of these offenders, but it was particularly so with him.
But what we tried to do on Criminal Minds, at least, was to portray these killers as regular human beings, because we didn't want people to think that the only people who killed were monster predators. You know, these people that you would automatically know were very bad people. We wanted to show people who were charismatic and charming, people who had real jobs and real families, all these types of people who actually had an underlying desire to kill.
Ed Kemper was known for his huge stature and soft voice. He was a kidnapper, cannibal, and necrophiliac. He could be quite charming, which helped him to lure his victims.
I knew anybody that came up there and gave me a funny look or a fishy eye or quizzical look, I'd have blown their brains out thinking they were coming to get me. And if it'd been in a city, I would have been a mass murderer at age 15. These are the ones. Now, would you get in the car with this man? Huh? State has made me much more credible as a human being.
And so we went and we interviewed Ed. I talked to him at first, and I've never seen such a big human being. But Gabby, I couldn't get him to shut up. He was the nicest guy. And the first thing that he said was, Mary Ellen, can I ask you a question? I said, sure, Ed, ask. And he said, I need some dating advice. And I did start laughing. He said, how do I get these women to stop coming and seeing me and writing me? I said, Ed, I'm not Dear Abby, and I'm an FBI agent. I don't really do dating advice. And so the two of us sat there and we just laughed. And so I tried to get Ed to do most of the talking during that interview. But before we left, I mean, Ed gave me a big hug. What do I care? I don't really care, because it's not my job to insult a serial killer or to degrade them or to put them, not make them feel bad. They don't have feelings, but it's not my job to treat them in a way that would be, I guess I could say, disrespectful. They don't have to talk to me if they don't want to. And I knew the guy wasn't going to break my neck. I guess he could have.
I could kill you now pretty easily. Do some interesting things before anyone showed up. Then you'd be with me in spirit.
But I mean, there were guards there. There were correctional officers. We had spent hours together, and he just said, "Can I give you a hug?" And I said, "Okay." So I probably, in hindsight, maybe I should have said no, but sometimes it's not the first serial killer that's happened to.
What the profilers learn from those interviews and their investigation gets put to work in the field. Jim Clemente remembers his last case as an agent. It was the abduction of a 7-year-old girl.
The sheriff was telling all the searchers, this is the day after she went missing, all the facts they knew. And he said, she left that school with 147 other children. She did what she did every day and met her sister at the gas tanks. And then they were supposed to walk home together, but they had an argument. So she ran off ahead and she just disappeared off the face of the earth. It was like an alien abduction.
Clemente asked to be taken to the scene and to follow the victim's path to where she disappeared. Clemente said, "Don't look for an outsider. The killer lives right here, and he is someone who sees the victim every day."
The person who did this lived in one of these 5 houses. He's probably in his early 20s, can't really hold a job, doesn't really have a relationship, lives with his parents, and he basically took her in a way that nobody expected.
Local law enforcement expressed doubt because no one on that block fit the profile.
And I said, those are the people you know about. There's somebody else who's here every day who knows this girl's pattern, who knew that this was the time she was extremely vulnerable. And the reason why you think it was an alien abduction is because she wasn't abducted. She walked up to the guy. Because every day he waves to her and says hi, and she waves back. She thinks he's a friend. And now she's upset and crying, and he waved to her, and she came over.
The victim's body was found in a town landfill. A couple months after Clemente retired, he got a call from the sheriff. The killer had come back to town. He had lived in a shed behind one of the houses on the block. He confessed to the murder.
You confined Summer Thompson against her will and sexually assaulted her.
Yes, sir.
You also admit that you lewdly touched her in her private areas and strangled her to death.
Yes, sir.
Jared?
He won't look at you, just a coward.
We know you did this. We have evidence. She trusted you. But you had to do what you did. And look where it got you. And now you're going to jail.
Summer Thompson's twin brother was a mix of sorrow and anger, and Jared Harrell showed no emotion. But I had to ask Jim Clemente, how was it that even before police had a suspect, his profile was so close?
So it's not that I'm some kind of clairvoyant or anything like that. It's that I've seen so many examples of these child abductions and why people misread the behavior. And they think that offenders are all these monster predators when many of them smile in your face and wave, and they end up taking advantage of us and we don't even suspect them.
So that's why I tell people, don't rely on your non-existent, it's not real gut instincts to get yourself to try to understand a circumstance better. If you don't have the background or experience in that particular situation, reach out for a friend. Ask them, what would you do in this situation? Reach out for a parent. What would you do in this situation? But I think so many of us just rely on this mystical barometer that we think we were born with. And that's when we make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes they're not fixable mistakes.
In Mary Ellen O'Toole's book, Dangerous Instincts, she teaches readers how to use more common sense and ask more questions to avoid getting into risks that they can't get out of. Jim Clemente uses the TV show Criminal Minds. In an episode that he wrote called Gabby, about a child abduction, he put in as many lessons as he could.
I tried to blend in so many teaching points over the course of that episode because I think it's so important that we understand that there are very different kinds of offenders, and obviously some of them are well known, some types, and others are not well known. And that, like the cases in which we are able to save children, especially after a protracted period, those were the things that motivated us. Those are the things that kept us going. And even through all the darkness and all the horrible cases that we worked on, the fact that we were able to save even one child's life over the course of our careers was an amazing accomplishment. And we were able to do it many times. And so I wanted to celebrate that for myself and for my other co-members of the BAU. To show that, this is a very honorable career, and being able to use your brain to outsmart some of the smartest offenders out there is a wonderful thing.
The formal science of criminal behavioral profiling is almost 50 years old, and the profilers now use what they've learned to identify killers and stop them earlier. But the goal is to be able to understand the elements of violent psychotic personalities well enough to move from case solving to intervention and prevention. As Mary Ellen O'Toole once said, "We're not there yet, but we're getting much closer."